The Archbishop of Canterbury says tomorrow's funeral for the Duke of Edinburgh is likely to be an anguished moment for the Queen. As family members viewed the many flowers left in tribute to her husband, the Archbishop said the Queen would face the service as a monarch and a grieving widow.
She's the Queen. She will behave with the extraordinary dignity and extraordinary courage that she always does.
We'll be looking at how the royal family will have to grieve, like so many others this last year, bound by the COVID restrictions. Also on the programme.
There is more money in this than there is in all the other parts of our business put together.
The actress Helen McCrory, known for her roles in Peaky Blinders and the Harry Potter films, has died of cancer at the age of 52. In the US, graphic police footage shows a police officer shooting dead a 13-year-old boy who appeared unarmed when he was killed. And coronavirus infection levels across the UK have fallen to their lowest level since the autumn, according to new figures.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, a first Masters Series semi-final for Dan Evans. He's into the Final Four in Monte Carlo. That and news from the Billie Jean King Cup in Sports Day.
Good evening. As final preparations are made for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh tomorrow at Windsor Castle, the Archbishop of Canterbury has spoken of what he called an anguished moment for the Queen. Justin Welby, who'll play a key part in the service, told the BBC that the Queen, as a grieving widow, now found herself in the same position as millions of others who've lost family members in the pandemic. Today, the Earl and Countess of Wessex viewed tributes and flowers left by the public outside St George's Chapel in the grounds of Windsor Castle. We'll have more on the reflections from the Archbishop in just a moment. But first from Windsor, here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
Outside St George's Chapel within Windsor Castle, some of the flowers left by members of the public have been laid out on the lawns. Close by, a wreath from the Prime Minister with a card paying tribute to a man to whom the nation owed more than words can say. There were wreaths too from Commonwealth nations, from Canada and New Zealand, countries which the Duke had often visited. The Earl and Countess of Wessex and their daughter came to inspect the flowers and some of the cards and other tributes which have been left, and this as the final touches for tomorrow's funeral were being put into place. All the military contingents who are involved in the short ceremonial procession have completed their main preparations. At the centre of the procession will be the Land Rover hearse, which the Duke helped to design. It will be in the castle's central quadrangle that the proceedings will begin. The service detachments will be drawn up. A few moments after 2:40 tomorrow, the Duke's coffin will be borne from the state entrance to be placed on the Land Rover. At 2:45, the small procession will step off for the 8-minute journey through the castle. Some members of the royal family will walk behind the coffin. The Queen will follow in a limousine. The route will be lined by the military. At 2:53, the coffin will arrive at the west steps of St George's Chapel. It will be borne to the top of the steps, where it will pause. At 3 o'clock, a 1-minute silence will be observed before the coffin enters the chapel for the funeral service. Inside the chapel, the Queen will sit by herself. Like all the 30 members of the congregation, she will wear a mask. At one point, the chapel will echo to the bugle call for action stations, a reminder of the Duke's service as an officer in the Royal Navy in the Second World War. In the town of Windsor, many of the residents have their own stories of the Duke.
You would see him out on his carriage and he would always acknowledge you. He would always say hello to the group of us as we were walking.
It'd be very strange because we've only ever known Prince Philip in my life. He's always been here.
So a castle which has witnessed many moments in Britain's long royal history is ready for another. The weather forecast for tomorrow is good, but both the palace and the police are hoping that that won't tempt people to come to Windsor. They've reiterated the point that no part of the funeral will be visible to spectators. The only way to follow it is to watch it on television. Audiences around the world will watch and listen as the Queen bids farewell to the man she described as her beloved husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, like all other funerals this year, the service for Prince Philip will be subject to COVID restrictions, with the numbers limited to 30 and social distancing rules requiring the Queen to sit alone. A little earlier, I spoke to the Archbishop of Canterbury as he prepared for his part in the service, and I began by asking him what the emotional impact of the occasion under these strict restrictions will be on Her Majesty.
She's the Queen. She will behave with the extraordinary dignity and extraordinary courage that she always does. And at the same time, she is saying farewell to someone to who she was married for 73 years. I think that must be a very, very profound thing in anybody's life. And I hope that the whole nation, if they believe in that, they live, they pray for her. If they don't, they sympathise and in their hearts offer their condolences to her and the hope for her to find strength in what must be an anguished moment.
Because she's both the monarch and a grieving wife.
She is a grieving widow, and over the last year, there's literally millions of people around the world who've been in her position. And they will identify, especially in one sense, part of the burden that Her Majesty carries is that burden of representing everyone in her person. And that's a heavy burden.
So this funeral will be a national event, but also one that resonates very personally for a lot of people.
I think it will resonate very deeply for a lot of people. I think there will be tears in many homes because other names will be on their minds, faces they've lost that they don't see again, funerals that they couldn't go to, as many haven't been able to go to this one. That will break many a heart.
Prince William and Prince Harry will both walk behind the coffin tomorrow, although not side by side. Other senior clerics have hoped publicly that the reported rift between them might be healed. Does the Archbishop agree?
I think this funeral is absolutely about the Duke of Edinburgh. And in the hundreds of funerals which I've taken, they have different impacts on people in different ways at the time and later. It's about the fact that whatever is going on in the family, that each one will be feeling a sense of loss, and that's where we keep our focus.
This is clearly a big moment in the nation's life. How do you hope that we will emerge from it?
I suspect that what the Duke would say is, now get on with it. And I hope that we will see this moment as something we share in the grief of this very, very hard year that we've all gone through. And then we'll say the best thing we can do is to do what he did in all his life. Just get on with it.
Archbishop, thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Welby speaking to me a little bit earlier. The stage and TV actress Helen McCrory, who also appeared in the Harry Potter films, has died from cancer at the age of 52.
The man you cut went to the police, but we dealt with it.
In recent years, she's played the matriarch Polly Gray in the hit BBC series Peaky Blinders. We can speak now to our arts correspondent David Sillito. And David, there's been a very moving tribute to her from her husband, the actor Damian Lewis.
Absolutely. I mean, looking back on a startling career, an award-winning stage actress, Macbeth, Uncle Vanya, a long history with the National Theatre. In movies, Narcissa Malfoy in the Harry Potter films. She was in the James Bond Skyfall, and also twice. She was Cherie Blair in The Queen and The Special Relationship. But I think TV audiences, of course, will know her best as Aunt Polly, this slightly fearsome matriarch of the Shelbys with a hand on the purse strings, the brains behind it all in many ways. And also on TV just a few months ago, in an interview with this studio, talking about raising money to help provide meals for the NHS. And of course, sitting alongside her at the time was her husband, the actor, and he said today, "I'm heartbroken to announce that after an heroic battle with cancer, the beautiful and mighty woman that is Helen McCrory has died peacefully at home, surrounded by a wave of love from family and friends. She died as she lived, fearlessly. God, we love her, and we know how lucky we are to have had her in our lives."
That tribute from Damien Lewis.
Yes.
Many thanks. David Silito there. The mayor of Chicago has appealed for calm after the release of footage showing an unarmed 13-year-old boy being shot dead by a policeman last month. The video shows Adam Toledo with his hands up and with no weapon. The police film shows a handgun near the spot where he fell. The teenager's death comes at a time of continuing high tension in the US over police killings. Barbara Plett-Usher reports now from Chicago.
The policeman chases the boy down an alleyway. "Raise your hands," he shouts. Then a shot is fired.
Stop it! Stop it!
Police had said the boy, Adam Toledo, was carrying a gun. But the video shows him raising empty hands before he falls to the ground. 19 seconds from start to finish.
Shots fired! Shots fired! Get an ambulance up here now!
A distraught Officer Stillman calls for medical backup, but they can't save Adam. It seems he had dropped his weapon before turning round.
Those videos speak for themselves. Adam, during his last second of life, did not have a gun in his hand. The officer screamed at him, "Show me your hands." Adam complied, turned around. His hands were empty when he was shot in the chest at the hands of the officer.
Another shooting this week in Minneapolis triggered nights of protest against police. The killing of a young black man at a traffic stop has become one more flashpoint in a year of demonstrations for racial justice. And now they have also started shouting Adam Toledo's name here. The anger has added to tensions over the George Floyd murder trial, which is winding down.
No trespass! No peace! No
the city is fortifying itself for possible violence after the verdict.
No racist!
Chicago has its own volatile history of police misconduct. City officials had demanded the release of the body cam footage after a public outcry.
Even as our understanding of this incident continues to evolve, this remains a complicated and nuanced story. And we all must proceed with deep empathy and calm, and importantly, peace.
A difficult time for the family and for the country.
Adam Toledo died in the alleyway right behind me, and he was one of the youngest people to have been killed by police in recent years in the U.S. And his death has stirred up familiar tensions here in Chicago because there were a lot of protests here last year demanding police reform after George Floyd was killed. In fact, the city had been preparing for a reaction to the verdict in that trial even before this happened. The mayor and the family are appealing for calm. Rita.
Barbara, many thanks. Barbara Plett-Usher there in Chicago for us. The time is 13 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. The royal family prepares for tomorrow's funeral for the Duke of Edinburgh. The Archbishop of Canterbury says the Queen will face the service as a monarch and a grieving widow. And still to come,
their way of coping with the challenges.
Coping with bereavement. We speak to two people who've lost loved ones during the pandemic.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, the build-up to this weekend's FA Cup semi-finals as Chelsea prepare to face Manchester City at Wembley.
China has said that it's willing to cooperate more with some European countries over the challenges of climate change, as the argument continues over which of the major economies is the biggest polluter. President Xi Jinping made the pledge during a video summit with the leaders of Germany and France. And there's movement from the US too. President Biden's climate change envoy has been in China this week trying to kickstart talks. Our science editor David Schuckman reports.
China is the world's greatest factory and its biggest polluter, and America is the second largest. Together they account for nearly half of global emissions, and there's now a US president determined to change that.
We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, We know it in our bones, and it's time to act.
So he's pushing for a lot more green energy, and he's reversing the Trump years by sending his envoy John Kerry worldwide.
Secretary Kerry, can we avert climate catastrophe?
Including the UK last month and, crucially, China just now.
We cannot solve the climate issue without China beginning to reduce their emissions. This is the key to the global puzzle. Biden has to figure out a way to compel Beijing to begin to cut their emissions, or all the efforts we're making domestically are going to be ineffectual.
One of the big arguments is over which of these two giant polluters should do more. The US points out that it produces about 14% of the global total of emissions, while China releases about twice that. But for its part, China says, look instead at the accumulation of greenhouse gases since 1750. America has emitted about a quarter of those, while China, which only industrialized relatively recently, has produced far fewer. Another dispute is over coal. Beijing is encouraging others to burn more of it. I filmed these Chinese workers at a coal-fired power station in Serbia, one of dozens of projects around the world. And this comes as pressure over human rights leads to worsening international relations, which may mean China sticks with coal. It's got big reserves which it can rely on.
If you are looking to a greater tension across the world, and particularly a greater confrontation with the United States, you probably want to hedge your bets and keep a hold of coal because there is so much uncertainty in the world.
Today, Chinese television reported on President Xi having virtual talks with the leaders of France and Germany. Climate change was the key topic. The pace of diplomacy on this is accelerating. David Shukman, BBC News.
Time for a look at the latest government coronavirus figures now. And there were 2,596 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means that on average, the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 2,588. The latest daily figure for the number of people across the UK in hospital with coronavirus is 2,291. 34 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 26 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 127,225. As for the continuing vaccination programme, 129,782 people have had their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, taking the overall number of people who've had their first jab to over 32.5 million. And the number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is 417,683, and that takes the overall number of people who've had their second jab to nearly 9 million people. Well, the latest figures show that COVID infection levels are down to their lowest levels since September. Let's talk now to Hugh Pym, our health editor. So, Hugh, that's good news, but does this predate the partial opening up in England this week?
Well, the answer to that is yes, Rita. Those daily reported cases we've just been hearing about are those who've come forward for tests. The Office for National Statistics survey follows people out in the community and picks up those through testing of households, those who don't know they've got the virus because they don't have symptoms. And it's taken seriously, this survey, by policymakers to give a wider view, and it shows that in all nations of the UK, infection rates were falling last week. And the amount of virus out in the community is at the lowest since September and has fallen 90%. That's the numbers infected since January. So 130,000 people have the virus in the UK as of last week, compared with nearly 1.3 million in January. But this was last week when schools were still out, so the risk of infections there was out of the picture. And of course, it was before the beginning of the next phase of easing in England, which took place on Monday. So next week's report from the ONS covering this week will be particularly interesting because of that opening up and more people moving around and retail and so on being open.
And Hugh, there's also new guidance out today on the COVID vaccine for pregnant women.
Yes, until now it's been a little unclear. the guidance for those who are pregnant. Those who are in health and care jobs and most exposed to the virus and with underlying conditions have been advised to talk to their GP and go ahead and have a vaccine. But for other women who are pregnant, it's really not been very easy to work out what to do. So the JCVI, the Advisory Committee on Vaccinations, have said today they recommend that pregnant women should be offered the jab in line with their age groups, moving down to younger age groups from now on in. And this follows data from the United States, where pregnant women have been given the vaccine. 90,000 have been given the jabs, mainly Pfizer and Moderna, and no undue safety concerns were revealed. So the advice here is that Pfizer and Moderna should be offered to those who are pregnant. That's not in any way raising any worries about AstraZeneca. It's simply saying the data is there for those two vaccines. And of course, for those under 30, they're already advised to take the Pfizer or Moderna vaccination. So this has been widely welcomed by medical leaders, saying it gives women a choice of whether to go ahead and have a vaccine or not, with a clearer picture to make that decision.
Hugh, many thanks. Hugh Pym there. Labour have written to the head of the Civil Service to ask him to investigate whether the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, breached the ministerial code after it emerged that he has shares in a company that can bid for NHS contracts in England. Mr Hancock declared in the latest register of MPs' interests that he acquired more than 15% of Topwood Limited, which specialises in secure storage and shredding of documents. The government says that Mr Hancock has acted entirely properly and has no active role in running the company. A court in Hong Kong has sentenced a group of 9 leading pro-democracy campaigners for organising and taking part in a huge protest march 2 years ago. The billionaire owner of Hong Kong's last opposition newspaper, Jimmy Lai, has been given a 14-month prison term, while the veteran activist Martin Lee received an 11-month suspended sentence. The Scottish Liberal Democrats have launched their manifesto ahead of next month's Holyrood elections with a pledge to prioritise the recovery from the pandemic. The party's leader, Willie Rennie, said it wasn't the moment to go back on what he called the divisions of the past with another independence referendum. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
As the smallest party in the last Scottish Parliament, Lib Dems have to make an effort to get noticed. Today, their leader turned barista for the cameras.
Do you want the legs to do this well?
Willie Rennie has made colourful photo calls a signature move.
We like to organise our visits to send a message.
Including rather amorous pigs during the last election.
You are the smallest party in the Scottish Parliament. What difference can Liberal Democrats make?
I can bring people together. I did that in the last year through the pandemic, working with Scottish ministers to get things done. I mean, we've got £120 million extra for mental health. We've got £80 million extra for education. We challenged them on things like the police in previous years.
This time, Lib Dem proposals include more NHS specialist diagnosis and treatment in local communities, training more mental health specialists, a minimum starting salary of £30,000 a year for teachers, a job guarantee for 16 to 24-year-olds, and moving 1 million homes to zero-emission heating by 2030. The party are also against Scottish independence and would oppose another referendum.
No, I don't believe we should have a referendum. I'm not in favour of one. I'm not in favour of independence.
If people have voted for a majority of MSPs who do support independence, how can the Liberal Democrats stand in the way of a democratic choice about Scotland's future?
Because I've said during the election that I'm against independence. I will never vote for it. I'll never encourage it. I'll never support it, because I don't think it's right to divide the country when we should be focusing on recovery from the pandemic. I mean, it's really simple for people. They need to just vote for Liberal Democrats if they want to stop all this nonsense.
The Liberal Democrats don't see themselves as the next Scottish government or even partners in a coalition. But the way the electoral system works here, it's really difficult for any party to get an overall majority. So the smaller parties can sometimes get some of their priorities implemented. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
There'll be elections to the Welsh Parliament, the Senate, on the same day as those in Scotland. And today the Welsh Lib Dems launched their manifesto too. Their leader, Jane Dodds, pledged to put post-pandemic recovery first by freezing business rates and by creating a £500 million Welsh Towns Fund.
We want to make sure that we support our high streets and our small businesses. We want to abolish business rates and have a much more different model. On the mental health, we want a 24/7 mental health service. For our carers, we want to make sure they have the living wage, and we want better working conditions for them. And finally, on the planet, we want to make sure that there's a better funded approach to our planet and to make sure that we address climate change here in Wales.
Let's go back now to our main story, the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh. As we heard earlier from the Archbishop of Canterbury, the scale of loss over the last year, combined with COVID restrictions, has meant that hundreds of thousands of families haven't been able to say goodbye to loved ones in the way that they would have wanted. Small funerals, limited wakes and social distancing have made grieving and commemorating lives difficult. Sian Lloyd has been to meet two families who, like the royal family, have recently had to cope with loss.
They have lost the people closest to them during a pandemic which has left hundreds of thousands bereaved and in mourning.
Everyone says that if he used to walk into a room, his smile would just lighten up the room. Sorry.
A year has just passed since Raj Agarwal died from COVID, but to his wife of 26 years, it seems like yesterday. A family man who loved a party. He ran a chain of convenience stores and was well known in Leicester, here delivering free supplies to the city's Glenfield Hospital just days before he died. Restrictions at that time allowed for only 10 family members to attend his funeral, and social distancing regulations prevented people showing comfort in the usual way.
At times like this, we like to be together with friends and family, and usually it's quite a big gathering, talking about the good times together, and we have lost out on all of that. We haven't been able to share any of our grief with any of our family, and it's been very, very difficult.
In Peterborough, 72-year-old Gary Stewart finds peace in the garden that his late wife Judith loved so much.
I was such a lucky man. You know, I mean, I had 52 years with a woman I adored. And, some people never get that.
A dinner lady for 25 years and the leader of a local choir, Judith was much loved by many. Gary could not bring himself to choose the 30 allowed to attend her funeral. 4 members of the close family were present.
If things had been normal, then there would have been a service in church where everybody would have been there, would have been singing hymns, and the creme would have had people, whoever wanted to go. But, it was nothing like that. It was just a process that we had to go through.
Gary has set up an online book of condolence. Sunita is carrying on with Raj's charity work, fundraising for the NHS. Their way of coping with the challenges this pandemic has brought to their grieving process. Sian Lloyd, BBC News.
Well, let's go back now to Windsor and to the final preparations for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh tomorrow. Our correspondent Daniela Ralph is there. And Daniela, the final touches being carried out.
Yes, that's right, Rita. The final rehearsals taking place here in Windsor today, a town that is so used to the big royal event. But this one will feel very different. When you come into Windsor now, there are signs on the roadside warning people to stay away and to avoid gathering at a royal residence. And that is a little bit counterintuitive for a place like Windsor, where people are so used to a royal event dominating. But tomorrow there will be more police patrols out on the street and more of these volunteer stewards out as well, with people being told to stay away and to watch and listen to the funeral service at home, because there'll be nothing to see here. Both the procession and the service will be behind the castle walls. So the mood will be very different from royal occasions of late. Tomorrow will be very sombre and very solemn. And I think perhaps especially when we first see the Queen, which is due to be just before 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, in what must be one of the saddest days of her long reign.
Daniela, many thanks. Our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph there from Windsor. OK, let's take a look at the weather now. Here's Thomas Schaffernacker.
Rita, thank you. The weather this weekend is looking fine for most of the UK. The mornings will still be a little on the chilly side, but it is really the story of the month so far. We've had so many frosts, and there'll be a touch of frost again this coming night. High pressure has extended its way all the way from Scandinavia across much of Western Europe, so we've fine, settled weather. This is the satellite picture from earlier on. You can see a bit of fair weather cloud developing there across England and a weather front just to the northwest of us. It can't make any progress because of the high pressure at the moment affecting the UK. But clear skies tonight means it will be a chilly night once again, anywhere from eastern Scotland down the spine of the country to the south coast. But in western and northwestern areas, it should just about be frost-free. And that's because we have more of a southerly breeze lifting in. And I think tomorrow, perhaps a little bit more cloudy here in the very far northwest, but generally speaking, it is going to be a mostly sunny day and best temperatures out towards the west, probably peaking at around 14 or 15 degrees Celsius. So some improvement on what we had today. Now here's Sunday's weather forecast. The high pressure is still just about dominating the weather. Well, only just. And this weather front starts to move in off the Atlantic. That does mean increasing amounts of cloud for Northern Ireland and at least western parts of Scotland. And I think here there'll probably be some light rain on and off through the course of the afternoon. But the vast majority of the country are at least in for a bright day, if not sunny day, a little bit further towards the east. And those temperatures on Sunday probably peaking at around 13 to 15 degrees Celsius. And it looks as though we'll keep the slightly milder weather into Monday and Tuesday, and then sometime next week it could turn a little bit colder again. But let's enjoy the weekend.
We will. Thank you, Thomas. Well, that is all from BBC News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.